Thank you for joining us in the Allyship, a Lifestyle series hosted by Region 1 of the SNMA. We hope this space allows us to exchange ideas and practice essential skills in being effective allies in the fight for racial justice alongside our Black peers, faculty members, and community members. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce you to our speaker for today, Rebekah Rogers. Rebekah graduated from Spelman College with a BS in Bio and a math concentration. After college, she attended the UCLA Medical School as part of the Charles Drew Education Program and is the founder and CEO of Black Roots Tutoring. She helps students of minority backgrounds realize their potential and excel academically by recognizing their strengths. Thank you so much for your presence, Rebekah. We're so stoked to have you.
Kamal for that intro. Welcome everybody. My name's Rebekah, as just stated. Yeah, let's just get started. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat box and I'll see if I can get to them if we have time. Let us discuss. So this is my presentation. We are going to be discussing the history of anti-Blackness in academic medicine. This is a presentation by me, and it is hosted on an affiliation with the SNMA, Region 1. So let's start. History, always you got to start with the beginning. There's never really a beginning, so I just kind of chose the beginning, and we're going to go from there. So before anything, we had the Civil War. 1861 to 1865 was the Civil War, and before that, slavery was legally nationally, which means that everyone was either a passive or an active racist. Again, in order to not be a racist, you have to be an active anti-racist. By doing nothing, you are with the rest of the system continuing on in your passive racism. So enough about misogynistic white men. So let's start at the beginning, 1847, the beginning of the American Medical Association. So prior to 1847, America was in a space where they were trying to figure out how to legitimize the medical community. There were a lot of concerns that people were kind of practicing however they felt, that there was no standardized of care, that people were able to like there wasn't one standard treatment for diabetes, there wasn't one standard treatment for most medical conditions. So they founded the American Medical Association and wanted to start to standardize some forms of care. So when the American Medical Association was founded, to give some further context, there were no Black people officially accepted nationally into the AMA. They originally wanted to allow individual chapters and individual, chapters, I guess is the best word, to decide who became members of their chapters. And from the chapters, they would decide who became a national member. So because you had to be first admitted into a chapter before you could be admitted nationally, there were no Black people who were members of the AMA in 1847. So the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C. was founded in 1862. The Freedmen's Hospital is now associated with Howard Medical School, which is the one of 4 historically Black colleges and universities that were created. Howard was founded to train both physicians who were treating slaves who had fought in the Civil War, and also to train former slaves who wanted to become physicians after the Civil War ended. So the Freedmen's Hospital, there were other Freedmen's hospitals around the South that had already been founded, but the one in Washington, D.C. is very unique in that it was the first that was federally funded. So people would pay tax dollars, and some of that tax dollars would go to supporting the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C., just to give a little context. So the MSDC was created in 1869, I apologize. And it initially refused to admit any Black people. It was right by the Mason-Dixon line, and slavery was a thing still. technically shouldn't have been a thing, but people, if you guys know anything about Juneteenth, people took their dandy time to actually let slaves be free. So the MSDC was a whole bunch of white people, and like I said previously, the Freedmen's Hospital had been founded about 7 years prior. So there were already Black physicians who had been newly minted, also Black physicians who had been minted a long time previously and were on staff at the Freedmen's Hospital. And in order to have actual like privileges as a physician, similar today, how you have to have like your license and board certifications to be able to actually work in a hospital, even back then, you had to be part of some type of a medical organization or a medical society to be able to be some type of license to perform medical treatments in America. And so the MSDC, and so also to give context, each individual medical society had its own congressional charter. And so the Congress could only charter one medical society for each area. And so Congress was kind of in charge of which societies got to be affiliated with the AMA when it officially started. So giving history, the MSDC refused to admit Black physicians. Those Black physicians were already working with the Freedmen's Hospital. They needed to like have some kind of validity, and the MSDC was like, nah. So those Black physicians, in association with some other white physicians, they formed the NMSDC, which was called the National Medical Society of DC. And to give you a little bit more context, the NMSDC was not only Black people. Even back in 1869, there were white men who were on staff at the Freedmen's Hospital and other white physicians who were in the area who felt that the discrimination from the MSDC against Black physicians was so problematic that they also decided they would not join the MSDC, bonded together and form the NMSDC. First, in this talk, that is the first example of people being actively anti-racist. So after 1869, then the Congress basically decided that the MSDC's refusal to admit other physicians to the MSDC, they decided that that was discriminatory and unconstitutional. However, the next step from the like, okay, this is a discriminatory thing, should be to remove your congressional charter. The Senate, again, 4 years after the end of the Civil War, they could not agree on anything. And so they could not actually revoke the congressional charter from the MSDC, even though they had decided that the MSDC was acting in a discriminatory manner. So continuing on, later on that year at the annual AMA conference, which, at the annual AMA conference, there were NMSDC Black delegates who wanted to go sit at the House of Delegates, AKA wanted to be accepted into the AMA. And again, because you can only have one charter per area to be the official society for medical professionals, the NMSDC and the MSDC could not both be there. The AMA decided that they didn't want to intervene and they wanted to let it be a regional matter, and therefore, because the MSDC already had a congressional charter, Black delegates were not able to sit there and, again, pass the racism. So 1876, the first woman was accepted into the AMA. Not a Black woman. Black people were still not there. The women got there. Black women, no. Black men, no. So
Rebekah, I can't hear you.
So 1893, Johns Hopkins opened, and when Johns Hopkins first started, it was, they were having issues with their funding, where the person who had founded Johns Hopkins, he had a lot of money from railroads, and basically, as soon as he died, all of his railroad stock went down and there was no actual money to found Johns Hopkins. So they had to go look for a bunch of donors. They found 4 donors who were all women, and all 4 of those women mandated that when Johns Hopkins opened, if their money was going to be associated with it, they had to accept women from day one. So starting in 1893, Johns Hopkins was accepting men and women to their medical school. Again, not Black women, just women. So fast forward to 1906, the AMA decided to start publishing a list of all of the physicians who were somewhat accredited nationwide. All of those physicians just had their names listed, but the physicians who were Black physicians got a little COL asterisk next to their name. Although we feel like that's not that significant, going back to, again, most colored physician, Negro, Black, whatever you want to call them, those physicians were not able to be associated with the AMA. Because they were not able to be associated with the AMA, they were not able to actually do all of the hospital regulations that other physicians were able to do. This also led to them having issues being able to carry malpractice insurance, as well as being able to have equality when it came to having access to all patients. And so it was really difficult for all of these physicians who were designated colored to be able to fulfill a normal medical practice, because there were so many barriers created by them having to label themselves as colored from the AMA. So 1910, the famous medical education in the United States and Canada for the Carnegie Foundation, which you guys may know as the Flexner Report, came out. Some of you may know the Flexner Report was commissioned officially by the AMA. The AMA was obsessed with medical education in Germany and medical practices in Germany, and wanted to create some type of standard in America to reflect that standard in Germany. And those physicians decided to commission in an independent person to do all of that research. The person they decided to hire, his name was Abraham Flexner. They also were associated with the Carnegie Foundation. The Carnegie Foundation does a lot with education in America, has for at least 150 years. So they thought that would be a good partnership. So during that time, Flexner went and visited all 155 medical schools that were in existence at that time, and came back with very interesting viewpoints about what should change. So first of the things that Flexner decided should change is that Black physicians can only work on Black patients. They don't need to work on white patients. They don't need to work on anybody but Black patients. Beyond Black physicians only working on Black patients, they couldn't do any specialty work on those Black patients. So if a Black patient needed anything that required surgery, if a Black patient needed anything that required anything more than preventive measures or basic antibiotics, that Black physician was unable to provide those services. It also decided that Black physicians were supposed to help maintain infection rates of the Black patients, because this was about 50 years after slavery, and 8 years before the Spanish flu, which we are all obsessed with in the day of COVID. And so because of that, the Spanish flu, more people died because of bacterial infections than the actual virus. So one of the things that they were trying to work on was creating some type of sanitation. So that was one of the major things that Black physicians were able to do, is keep sanitation rates for Black patients who were in proximity to white people. It also, I didn't know this previously, but it decided that all women-only medical schools had to close. I didn't know there were any women-only medical schools before, but it decided that all of those, similar to the HBCU medical schools, it decided that the women-only medical schools were too specialized, and those women can just integrate into medical schools with men. They don't need their own special thing. So close all women's medical schools. It also closed, there were at the time 5 HBCU medical schools, or historically Black colleges and universities. It closed 3 out of the 5 of those. The largest medical school that was closed was known as Leonard Shaw University, and in 1910, it closed in 1918, and by 1918, it had trained over 400 Black physicians, and it was forced to close both because of funding issues and because of the results of the Flexner Report. The Flexner Report, also because of the specialization thing, decided that all funding was going to go to white medical schools instead of Black ones, and any leftover federal funding would go to a Black school. So the 1950s, going further. So other stuff happened. The NMA was created. The AMA eventually took away the whole colored listing next to the Black physicians thing. But by that time, like, Black physicians were so over the AMA, they really didn't care. They had already done the NMA and were on to the next doing their own thing. Giving caveat, there were some Black physicians at some point who had gotten into the AMA, but most Black physicians were part of the NMA, not the AMA at this time. So the 1950s, segregation was still a thing, and the AMA had still not created any national standardization for all of the people who were involved. And so there was a delegate meeting that was held in the South, and it was held in a segregated cafeteria. And although it was a national meeting, the AMA, because it decided that it didn't want to get involved in individual matters, it just didn't do anything. So all of the Black delegates who were part of the AMA, who were official members of the AMA, after what had happened in 1870, they were still not allowed to sit in the House of Delegates, and the AMA did nothing. 1950s, still continuing to be passively racist. 1980s comes down, and Ronald Reagan is our president, who is such a great man to society, especially for Black minorities and, you know, economic equality. So Ronald Reagan came through and he was like, no, I need for all white men to make all the money, so we need to make everybody else not have money. There was also a whole fear that, like, social services, communism, socialism, all of that was going down. And so Ronald Reagan was like, we cannot have Medicaid or Medicare. We cannot have any federally funded healthcare services provided by the government. It needs to be privatized. The AMA decided to officially oppose Medicare and Medicaid and contracted with Ronald Reagan to do something called Operation Coffee Cup. And Operation Coffee Cup was where the physicians' wives, predominantly physicians' wives, at that time, in the 1980s, it was still predominantly men in medicine. So those physicians' wives would hit up their friends in their communities and be like, hey, you should come over for coffee. And they would come over and have coffee, and then they would talk to them about their concerns about Medicare and Medicaid. And it was federally, it was like the AMA with Ronald Reagan arranged to have Operation Coffee Cup. So we all know Medicare and Medicaid ended up being approved, but the AMA's official stance was against Medicare and Medicaid when it first came out. So fast forward to 2020, the current CME, I didn't feel like taking a picture and like posting it, but there are 0 Black people for 12 on the current CME. The CME is the Committee for Medical Education. The CME was created after the Medical Education in the United States and Canada, otherwise known as the Flexner Report, to make sure that those medical standards established in 1910 would continue to be part of medical education. So even 110 years later, there is still a severe lack of representation on the CME. And so these are you guys are going to be working through some scenarios and discussing different articles that have been written in some of the issues that were posed in those articles. And these are my references, and that is my talk. I apologize for all the technical difficulties. I hope you enjoyed it.